Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 10 minutes. In this week's Climate Curious, we're mapping the tropics with founder of the network MapBiomas, Tasso Azevedo. Tasso and his team have been taking satellite data from the past 40 years and creating maps that track the environmental impact, both good and bad. Using this information, people in the tropics are able to make more informed decisions when it comes to land management and get a better understanding on which practices are helping create carbon sinks and which ones are making carbon sources. Over to Tasso to hear more. Stay curious.
Very excited for this next conversation. I first saw our guest today speak at the Skull World Forum in 2022, and so very excited to be sitting down with Tasso Azevedo from MapBiomas. It is a fantastic project. You're also a TED Audacious Award winner this year. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so currently what we are trying to do is to have the capacity in every tropical country to map historically how the land is being transforming in each country. Basically, we broke down each country, in pieces of 30 by 30 meters.
Yes.
And then the idea is to tell the story of each one of those small pieces.
Right.
Like, for example, it was a forest in 85, and then in 97, there was a deforestation event with fire and so on, and then it was converted to pasture, and then you have cattle in this place, and then in 2013, it was converted to soybean, and it has been soybean until now. So by knowing the story of each one of those small pieces, when we put together the 9.6 billion pieces that makes Brazil, then yes, you have the history of the land use on the last 40 years. So why this matters? Because if we want to get the climate correctly, everything we do on the land is what will define whether we get to the 2 degrees or not. Why? Because if you think about fossil fuels, for example, it's a question basically to decrease the emissions, but you can't do any removal. But what happens in the land is that you can have emissions or you can have removals, and just depend on what's the decisions you take on the way we use the land. And the places in the planet where those balance is actually most negative today in terms of emissions is in the tropics, because it's where most of the land use is changing.
Oh, I see.
The vision is that by understanding how these things are happening, we can have better decision on actions that could increase the removals, for example, by restoration, by best management of the soil and so on, and stop or decrease any actions that would increase emissions like deforestation, degradation, and so on. But this is very specifically locally. Every country is a different story. Like in Brazil, it's very important to understand the transition from natural environments to pasture land, because it's the main use of land. But if you go to Indonesia, this will be like, for example, palm oil or something like this. And so what MapBiomas does is it's a network of 100 plus organizations in 15 countries now, which we basically try to guarantee that every country has the capacity to map whatever is important for them on the whole story in the last 4 decades. So those places where it's most needed to have the proper decision, they have the tools in hand.
For people who are really coming to this for the first time, why are the tropics so important?
In the whole planet, there is about 4 billion hectares of forests, right? The majority of this forest is actually on the temperate zones, but the majority of the carbon and biodiversity is on the tropics. In the temperate zone, it's more or less stable.
And the amount, the northern,
temperate zones will be like Europe, Canada, US, right, Japan,
yes,
North Asia. And the tropics is more like the Central Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. So the thing that is really incredible is that in those countries, the process of transformation of the land use happened centuries ago. And the process of transformation is happening right now as we speak in those tropical regions. So for example, I I'm 53. I was born in 72 when the concept of sustainability was forged in Stockholm, right?
Right.
And so in 75, there was the first estimation of the deforestation in the Amazon. How much of the Amazon was deforested? And was 0.5%. Okay? So today, it's 19%, close to 20%. So in my lifetime,
Wow.
we basically in 50 years, we ripped off 20% of the Amazon. And we have occupation in the Amazon for at least 13,000 years. So in 13,000 years, 0.5%.
Right.
On the last 50 years, just moving very fast. So this is very common in most of the tropical region. So what we want to guarantee is that the ways we are taking decision today should not be the tragedy that we had in the temperate zone before. We don't have to lose all our forests and natural resources to realize afterwards that we have to recover everything. So how can we leapfrog, jump from one side to the other? And that's all about the decisions we take on the land use.
That's incredible. And I guess I'm curious to know this tool that you've built. How are you seeing it being used?
It's actually being used. There is about 500 use cases for different things. For example, you take the banks in Brazil, so financial system, you should not give credit or any financial incentives or mechanisms for any operation that have any illegality. So illegal deforestation is a big thing in Brazil. So what we do is that we track every single deforestation, we report on that. And so the banks, before they give credit to any property, they can check by the code of the property, they can check on our system whether there is any deforestation that would have some evidence of illegality. So we don't say if it's legal or not, but just say, here's a deforestation, very clear, one picture before and after deforestation. You you can't miss it.
Yes.
And so that's one application. Other one, for example, is the main land use in Brazil is cattle, like pasture land. But pasture, if it's well managed, it's sinking carbon. If it's poor managed, it's actually emitting carbon.
Right.
And so the difference is basically like if you manage well, you can have more production and you can sink carbon. On the opposite direction, you will be emitting carbon and you're producing less. So several companies and organizations want to target those areas that are like degraded so they can help them to transition for something that is sinking carbon. And so you need to find them.
Right.
So one of the things we do, like we map the pasture, not just saying it's pasture. We say this pasture is good, high vigor, or this pasture is like degraded, low vigor. And so they can target the areas that they want to work, whether this is in a municipality, a farm. So like you have the story of the land use for all the 7 million properties in Brazil, every municipality, every protected area and so on.
And are you doing this using satellites? How are you doing this?
This is based on satellites. So what we do is we harvest every single image available and in the public catalogs since 85. So there are satellites measuring the Earth at least every 15 days since 85. And those were in archives everywhere. We just put all of them together and then we divide the country in pieces of 30 by 30 meters. And then for each one, we tell the story along the way. So we do use a lot of machine learning, not specifically like AI on what we see today, but it's kind of the machine learning where we train the algorithms to actually identify what is the piece of land pixel by pixel. And the difference from what historically has been done before is that imagine you have a picture in front of you. And so if you see a cat in this picture, you can design, here is the cat. So you can design the cat, right? Now, if you have to do this in a large scale, look into the whole territory of Brazil, it's a very large country. You can't really do this one by one, it takes too much time. So the way we do it is like we take each pixel and then we make the machine to understand if that pixel belongs to a cat or not. So imagine you say cat, no cat, cat, no cat, cat, no cat. So if you turn on only the cat, you can see the cat. Now we do this with 29 classes. So imagine you are looking for 29 things on the map, and then you would do it doing pixel by pixel for all the period of time of 40 years that we analyze. So it's kind of if you have a time machine, and then you can navigate on this time machine the way you want.
The quality, right, of the images must have improved. Has it improved? I'm making this assumption.
Yeah, but the most important is like, although you can have like images with higher resolution today, for example, instead of like a pixel about 30 by 30 meters, you could have a pixel of 3 by 3 meters. What is most important is to understand the dynamics over time.
Okay.
So you understand what is the transitions that are happening. So we use the 30-meter resolution because that's the best image we have going back to 85. And so you can rebuild the story. Everything that is produced is open source and free for anyone to use, including for business purpose.
Right.
So the idea is that anyone in any industry, in any area, whether it's the government, companies, civil society, let's say, has no excuse to not take good decisions,
right,
because the information is available for free and open source to anyone for their decisions.
So here's a question for you. With the Audacious Prize, for example, and this work you're doing overall, what's your vision for it? Where is it going?
So the vision is that, like, the importance of this is to give the capacity to every tropical country to be able to map whatever is important for that specific region. Say in Brazil, it's very important to measure pasture. In Indonesia, palm oil. In Peru, they have glaciers. We don't have glaciers in Brazil. So the idea is that if every tropical country, which is where all this thing is happening, have the capacity to produce their own maps, they will empower their own societies to do it. So
right,
our audacious idea that is to get by 2030 to cover 70% of the tropical area, with countries having local organizations doing that. And MapBiomas, by the way, is not an organization. Okay. It's a network. It's basically NGOs, startups in technology, universities working together in those different countries to produce this open source data.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for telling us about this. Thank you so much for joining us. That's wonderful.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
stay curious.